Cool. Thank you so much for that amazing welcome. That's super happy. I'm going to be talking about live student communities. And before I get into the talk, I want to just mention I'm going to be bringing up some difficulties we go through in different stages of our community. And I'm going to be asking some questions that you might feel uncomfortable about admitting that you're compliant to. I'm going to be giving examples of things I've done horrifically wrong. So I'd invite you all to don't feel embarrassed if you have to raise a hand at a point which may not seem that friendly. But if you do feel a little bit personally attacked, don't worry about raising your hand, and I apologize. So before I get going, for those of you who don't know me, as I said yesterday, my name is Joe. I run the student programs over at GitHub. And actually, I want to start by talking a little bit about what that means and what my job means. And I'm going to start by talking about that in terms of what you will do as technical students. As technical people, as programmers, as people who may be into development, maybe just interacting with the tech community, you essentially are solving problems. And you find a problem that you can solve, and you solve that problem maybe on the computer, maybe in your communities, and you find a solution to that problem. And then sometime down the line, another problem occurs, and you solve that one too, because you're amazing. And then it happens again, and it happens again, and it happens again, and it happens again, and again, and again, and again. And eventually you're just like, you know what, this is a trash fire. Let's just stop all of this. But then you need to solve all these repeated problems. And the way you solve these repeated problems is you look for patterns in those problems, right? You find what are the common elements? What can I abstract out and solve in an automated way? And we call that programming, right? You find these repeated problems that look kind of similar, like fizzbars or like algorithms, and you write a solution for those that you can do over and over and over again. That is how you as programmers solve problems. That's how hackers solve problems. As I said, we call that programming. And the key thing to these solutions, the thing that makes them applicable to these problems that you encounter day after day after day, is that the solutions you create through writing code are reproducible. You can run them again and again on the same inputs and get the same outputs. They're scalable. I mean, you've written the code. You don't have to sit there solving the problem manually every day, right? And they're automated. Again, like you can just put this on a server somewhere and run it, and your problem is solved at scale. So when we apply that to me, I'm not a software engineer. You people aren't computers. I can't fix you with code. How do I solve these problems? What are the problems that I have to encounter, and how do I fix them? What are the patterns that I look for? So the main problem that I'm helping you all to do, the main problems that I'm looking to solve, are problems related to helping students become a better developer. At GitHub, my job is to help you all and help your communities become better developers. So I look for patterns in problems that you encounter in helping your communities become better developers. You all have students on your campuses who are learning to become developers, and they all encounter problems, and you encounter problems in helping them. But as I said, I can't solve that with code. I can't write a little web script that magically makes all of you amazing public speakers. And I can't just automate sponsorship. As much as I'd love to write a web script where just gives you froze money at your faces, don't think my boss is going to like that. So what are my reproducible, scalable, and automated solutions? How do I, as a student program manager, come up with those things? The clue is in the name. You program, I have programs. So one of those that you may recognize is a student developer pack. The problem here that you folks came to us with is I want to be a better developer. And to be a better developer, I need access to servers. I need access to tools. But those things are really expensive. So how do you get access to those? Well, the Student Developer Pack, you sign up, you have a GitHub account, we verify that you're a student, and then we are able to say to all these other companies around the world, we know this person is a student, we have gone through the work to verify them, we know that they need this to become a better developer, can you help them out? It's reproducible, it's scalable, and it's automated. You just sign up, we verify that you're a student, and then you get access to loads of free developer tools. Campus Experts, for example, is another program that we run, and that asks the question, that's solving the problem of helping you build your communities. You came to us saying, we're trying to run a society, we're trying to run a hackathon, we're trying to run a club. We don't have the resources we need, we don't have the skills we need. How do we solve that problem? So with Campus Experts, that's a program where you sign up and we provide you training through webinars and now an automated system, which I'll talk about in a bit. We provide you swag, as you've seen all day in the bright red hoodies, and Wilhelm. We provide you cash. So the way now to get benefits from GitHub isn't to send me a cold email where I then have to read your 60-page sponsorship document, which is really pretty, I promise you, but I don't want to read 100 of them. So now as a Campus Expert, you get access to those privileges automatically. And we now have 45 of these in 15 countries doing amazing things for their communities. We've got people like Comrade, who did a Makey workshop out in rural Cameroon at a time when the Cameroonian government had cut off internet for 3 months in response to a school strike. So they had no schools for 3 months and no internet for 3 months. These kids had no way to learn. And this university student went out and taught them himself for 3 months. He's an incredible human being. We have people like Amy, Ruxy, and Sarah. 2 of them are here, Sarah's not. Amy organises a Women in Tech conference. It's a really big event in the Midlands, and Ruxy and Sarah went down and helped her with that. And with people like Yosef, who was also in Abdul's talk. Yosef's lecturer heard that Yosef was involved with GitHub and invited him to give a Git lecture during their software engineering session. So these people are all accessing this program that's helping them provide things to their communities, and we're able to support them doing that in a scalable, reproducible, and automated way. The final way we do that, which many of you will hopefully have been party to, is the first-time grant. This is, again, the question of like, hey, we want to bring hackathons to every campus, but as we've seen from Yu's talk, getting money is sometimes really hard. So how do we help people spread that hackathon? As a first-time hackathon organizer, you just want to run the event, right? You don't want to have to learn how invoices and quarterly cycles work. That's awful. So we said to, we worked with MLH to provide $1,000 to every first-time MLH member grant. That happens completely automated. I get an email intro to you, and you send me an invoice. I promise you I'd never look at them. It just happens. The money just leaves, and you end up with it. It's great. I love it. I'm sure the events are all wonderful, but I know nothing about them. And that's really important to me because that means I can do more of them. And this last year, we were able to do 90 events. That's $90,000 going to 90 events all over the world that if I had to individually reply to each sponsorship request and had to read all those proposals, we wouldn't be able to do that at that scale. We're only 600 people as a company. I could not send 90 staff members to those events, right? So this is, again, an example of solving these patterns, finding reproducible, scalable, and automated solutions. So that's my job. That's what I do. And that sets the basis for what I want to talk about today. I've been doing student communities for a super long time, both as a student myself when at University of Nottingham, then working at PayPal and MLH and now GitHub. And throughout that time and throughout the GitHub Campus Experts program especially, I've started to see patterns in struggles that societies, hackathons, and clubs go through. In particular, during Campus Experts training, we have this module. It's the first thing that you do in the Campus Experts training called the community assessment. The community assessment, well, module 1, introduction, it's got 2 exercises. One of them is called the community assessment. And this assessment is all about saying, where is my community now? What are the problems it faces? What do those problems look like? And basically, we give you a massive document of questions that just covers every aspect of your community and where there could be something wrong. The idea is to be a series of prompts that get you thinking about things about your community that you might not have otherwise thought about. And the outcome that people come from this is they essentially have this almost, I'm going to say essay, but I was told by Wilhelm this is a scary word, almost essay of like, what is my community? What does it mean? Where are the problems with it? And then you take that and you then do the second document, which is the impact proposal. Having now analyzed your community and saying, where is it now? You then use that community assessment as the vehicle to say where you want it to be. And you write out your proposal for how you're going to improve your community. And it's that proposal that we as GitHub use as the framework for helping you. You basically write a document of how you're going to fix your community. And I say, cool, here's the money. It's wonderful. So that's the first module on Campus Experts. But the really interesting thing about, I've already done that slide. The really interesting thing about all those documents is we've got 45 Campus Experts, and we've currently got about 400 in training. So each one of them is doing these documents. Each one of them is analyzing their community and then coming up with solutions. And when you take all of those documents and you put them back to back, you end up with like the Bible of hackathon solution, or like club solutions, right? Like we've got communities and societies that are like, where their schools are only 3 years old. We've got clubs where the club alone is 10 years old, and they're all analyzing themselves and writing what their problems down are and writing how they're solving them. It just turns into an encyclopedia of all this amazing knowledge. This like incredible book where no matter who you are, where you are, you could find a similar community that's solving the problems you're encountering within this bulk of knowledge. So I spent some time looking through all these documents for patterns and similar things that I think all student societies go through. So I'm going to talk about that life cycle. This is the life cycle, as the title says, of a student community from year 1 all the way up to year 10. And I think all of you, every single one of your clubs and societies will go through this cycle. You may disagree with me, and that's fantastic. And I would love to talk to you if you disagree with me, because I made this up a couple of months ago. This is not scientific at all, and I would love to hear if any of you think it's rubbish. I would postulate that it's not, but we'll see what it is. So first of all, let's start with what is the life cycle. So I'm going to quickly rip through what the life cycle is, and then we're going to talk about how Campus Experts solved each part of the life cycle. So the life cycle is essentially, where does it hurt? At each point in the cycle, what are the pain points? To each point in the cycle, there are many positive elements, but for some of them, there are just horrible things. And like especially, there are some points of the cycle which are almost wholly negative, some which are really great. And then, as I said in the second part of the talk, we're going to look at, like, with those pain points, how do we fix those? So here is the cycle. I like emoji. It's cute, right? So the cycle in the rough is being a baby, progressing through to your first steps, being a terrible teen. Oh no, sorry, your first steps and first fall, being a terrible teen, and then having a midlife crisis. So what do those all mean? So as a baby, oh sorry, my secret gift is falling over. As a baby, your society is basically, you've just made it, right? And the whole reason this like person-baby metaphor happened was because of this first stage. A lot of you, has anyone here founded a club from scratch? Okay, cool. So for those of you who've taken over a club, I'll briefly talk about what founding a club is like. Usually how this happens is you'll be in a club already, or you'll be in your community, and you'll observe there's a lack of something. That something that you want to do or something that your community needs isn't there. So you'll start to talk to the existing club and the existing community for a little while, and you'll brood on it for a little bit of time. You'll like carry this idea around of you as you go around the community, and you'll talk to people and you'll share that idea, and eventually you'll be ready to release it into the world, and you'll go and start this club. You'll go and launch this society. And just like having a baby, it's a monumental occasion. Everyone you've spoken to for the last couple of months is super excited that you have birthed this new life, and they all rush to talk to you, and everyone wants to come and see you. So it's a really exciting time because like the hype is there, and everyone wants to come take part in your club. And then over time, that hype, that positive energy around being involved in the club transfers into actual momentum. The administration starts to realize, wait, these participants are doing something really amazing. They're winning awards, they're going to hackathons, they're gaining skills, they're getting jobs. And suddenly, everyone else who wasn't involved initially, like the wider community, so you're doing the baby step, all your close friends and close colleagues are in there, and now everyone else wants a piece, right? The society, this is usually the stage where universities and schools ask you to be the official department society and that sort of thing. And that's a really great stage too, but this is where the first signs of struggle start to appear, as I'll talk about in a bit. Typically during this section, you encounter people getting involved who maybe don't completely get it because they want to be on the hype and they don't get the values. Next is the first fall. This is where inevitably something's going to go wrong. And in this case, it's usually by this point, by year 2+, where the original members have graduated out. And this results in the majority of your society's membership and experienced people leaving. Because if we think about that previous structure, most of your membership, up to 50% of your membership, probably arrived in the first year around the founding. And when we get to year 2, if that 50% was year 1, year 2 when it started, suddenly they've all graduated. And there's a huge drop in engagement, a huge drop in membership numbers, and most importantly, a huge drop in experience. And this is where societies go through their first struggles. Next up is the terrible teens. This is a result of those struggles. This is basically the idea that like, hey, during the founding and during the successive years, there was so much hype about this society. Everyone wanted to be involved. There was so much engagement. They did amazing things. We're like the first wholly new committee. How do we be that amazing? How do we be as amazing as the founders? We've got to change the logo. And that happens inevitably every time. New society presidents or new society committees. Who's changed the logo this year? Yeah, I see you. I see you. And that is basically procrastination, right? That is, what is the first most visible impact I can make? Is to change the logo. And that's great, that's positive energy, but just as with teenagers who want to spend all their time on video games, how do we channel that energy positively? Next up is the life crisis, and this is otherwise known as institutionalization. This is where you've been in the school so long, you are now kind of the de facto route to success. Some of you will recognize this, for example, UCL, you suffer from this a lot because your society is like really, really old. And that is basically like high achieving members of your school, of your student clubs, basically need to be on your committee in order to be like classed as like having made it, right? So suddenly your committees exponentially expand in order to accommodate all the people who need to go through them. And this is where we end up with committees that are like 20, 30, 40 people, whose committees are over 10. That's like companies, folks. And that introduces a lot of problems. Suddenly bureaucracy is a thing, and like processes are a thing, and students are not good at those for reasons that we'll talk about. But this is otherwise a really positive step. This is basically like the unstable period is gone. The ups and downs are gone. This is now just like the cruise through. You are now a part of school life, and that's great, and that's really important, but we need to talk about some ways we can deal with it. And then the cycle begins anew. At the point we were institutionalized, there'll be a very fixed way of doing things. New things will be difficult to do. So someone will eventually join and they'll say, hey, the students here have this need. Can we do it in this club? And somebody like, no, don't be silly. So then you have to start a new club. And that club then goes through the cycle. There is a slight addition that sometimes happens, which is sometimes inevitably a society has to end. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. One of the things we're going to talk about repeatedly through this talk is how club societies match with their community's needs. Sometimes the society is just no longer needed. The students that needed it have left, or that need has been resolved in the course, or that need is no longer relevant. I'm sure none of you have like a WordPress society in your schools. And so it's just time for those societies to end, and that's okay. Sometimes they end because of other reasons. They end because of lack of engagement from the student body. We're going to look at case studies from both of those. I think this is the exact same slide I just did. There we go, cool. So this is, I'm now going to walk through how and what these things happen. So a little bit more detail on the issues with each one. So now we have a quick look. So as I said, with the being a baby stage, everything is awesome. There are problems here that manifest. I think they're kind of boring problems. You've just started a new society. Like, just have fun with it. Don't worry. Just go do the thing. It'd be fine. But year one learn to walk is where the problems first really start to bite. This is where you, as people who are here now, people who have inherited societies, people who have just started new societies, you've just come through your first year as committee, you need to ask, why are members here? Reaffirm your values to yourself. And the main thing about this, the main thing I want to talk about, like, in terms of why are members here, is actually talking about what being a community means. A lot of us kind of, like, being a community is a kind of fuzzy thing. It's just we're lots of people in the shared space. Maybe we just kind of like have similar interests. But actually, I think there's a really particular definition, or definition I like. And that is the definition of a shared struggle. The strongest communities are ones that are formed around trying to solve a need. And I'll give you an example of that. One of the communities, or one of the societies that we see struggle most is like generic computer science societies. The Society for the School of Computer Science. And I think the reason that those societies tend to struggle is because there's not one need, right? Like, if you think of all the computer science students in your school, what do all of them need from a society? Some of them just want to socialize with people with similar interests. Some of them want to get the best degree they can. Some of them want to get a job in the industry. There's no one need there, which results in a split of focus and lots of fragmentation. And I think this is why we tend to see, I mean, a lot of you here, I imagine, aren't from CompSoc, you're from Hackathon founded equivalents, am I correct? Hackathon founded equivalent folks? Cool, that's a reasonable number. And basically that has happened because that's yet another focus that can't be addressed under the guise of this larger body. So when we have a shared struggle, it enables, first of all, a shared understanding. Everyone knows why we're here. If we're in a hackathon society, for example, our shared struggle is trying to integrate with the hackathon community. It's trying to build cool things. And we all know why we're here, and that's all our singular focus, and everything we do is refined around that process. So first of all, again, this is where did everyone go? And where did the experience go? When that huge bulk of people graduates out, and especially when the people who knew why the society was made graduates out, you get into a problem. One of the things that students are really bad at, that after you've been in this community for a couple of years especially, you'll notice students are really bad at, is something called knowledge transfer. There's a lot of things that you all know, there's a lot of experiences you all have that you don't necessarily realize you know, and it's really hard to tell your successor that you know that stuff if you don't know you know it. Which sounds obvious, but like, for example, Abdul spoke about how they're doing their handovers really early, how they brought in these new people in January. The reason that's super fantastic is because they're not having to explicitly share all their knowledge. The things that Abdul and Yosef don't know to share with these new committee members, they're going to see firsthand because they're involved with that handover while the society is still running normally. That make sense? If you don't, when people share knowledge poorly, or when you don't reiterate your values, especially like the reason the society was founded, people will jump in and pick up with their assumptions. Someone who's coming into the community or coming to the committee might have their own idea of what this committee is about without ever having spoken to you about your values or your mission in doing it. At the beginning of this conference, Swift reiterated MLH's mission. He restated the values and the reason they're here. That's so explicitly you as participants in MLH and MLH member events and potential MLH future employees know exactly what MLH stands for, you know the mission they're behind, you know the shared struggle, and you're able to get on board with that mission and lead it in the direction that they intended to go with rather than your own interpretation. Terrible teens, I said this is like, you just want to burn things down, you know, you just want to be infamous. So this is typically, I said, there'll be new logos. There'll be lovely logos, but there will be new logos. This is also the year where people get into fights with the SU. Let's have another embarrassing question. Who's in a fight with the SU? Who has tried to take their society independent of the students' union? Yeah, I see you. So I have a particular strong affiliation with this one because I had this with HackSoc in Nottingham. I was tribunaled by my students' union for refusing to do health and safety forms. I was right. I won the tribunal. I insist I was right. However, I shouldn't have fought that battle. Although I was right. What happened was the students' union caused HackSoc suffering for years after I was gone. In training sessions with the society, they would jab about, oh, it's HackSoc, and they would like cancel events with no warning and all sorts of horrible things. I basically bullied the society for about 5 years after I left, all because I didn't suck it up and just fill out some forms. Like, I didn't have to. We're clear on this. But I should have just done it. Like, and sometimes you need to kind of look at yourself and say, like, is this the hill worth dying on? Like, is this fight worth it? Your students' union, as much as it feels like the bank accounts are a pain and the bureaucracy's a pain, gives so much more to you than they take. And wanting to take things independent might feel really good for you now, but it's going to be so much better for future committees if it's within the organization. So life crisis, as I said, this becoming an institution. I'm actually going to leave this section until we get to Wilhelm because that's the really interesting bit. So cycle beginning anew said, the big question here is it fragmentation or is it diversification? When a new society forms, is it because, again, there is this genuine need, that there is a need that our members have? Like, are we forming a new society because members want it, or are we forming a new society because my CV needs to look shiny this year? You really need to think about what the needs of your members are, and if you're going to address them for actually starting a new society, maybe you actually just need a new event. And sometimes fragmentation happens because of fallout with leadership. Again, this is a really hard one to deal with, and there's no right or wrong answer. But if you, as good as it feels at the time, if you don't think about why your members are here and think about their interests first, it's going to become a problem. For you, it's going to become painful down the line. It's going to become painful for your members. And end of the road. Again, this comes down to why our members here. Maybe it is just time to wrap up, and we should be OK with that. So let's talk about campus experts and how they solved it. So as I mentioned, all of this cycle came from campus experts. So I'm going to walk you through explicitly how the campus experts tackle some of these problems. So again, just to reiterate cycle, it's your baby, learn to walk. What? This is bizarre. OK, so your baby, I don't have an example for, because I said it's not a very interesting one. Learning to walk, we're going to talk about Mr. Matt Berman. So Hack Sheffield was relatively new. Hack Sheffield is a new hackathon and a club formed around that hackathon. Matt and the committee at the time founded that hackathon, and there was a lot of momentum behind it, a lot of really positive energy. Matt joined as a campus expert near the end of his period as a president on that committee, which is a really interesting time to join as a campus expert. Campus Experts is a program about improving your community. We give you training in order to help you do that and to actually bring your community the best you can. So why would you join Campus Experts as someone who's about to leave your community? Matt's goal and the thing he set out in his impact proposal, the problem he set out to solve, was how do I transfer my knowledge, the reason I founded this, my values, all the things that I know to the next committee. And Matt's entire prospectus was entire proposal was based around that. So the main problem in the first year is knowledge transfer and reminding the committees to come why we founded this thing, why this thing is important. And Matt solved that through laying out a really solid plan of how he's going to go for that knowledge transfer. There's a number of members of Hack Sheffield here. I don't know how well they agree that Matt did that, but I've heard good things, so I'm sure it's OK. Again, the important thing here is really communicate your values. A really good example of this is actually Twilio. Twilio have a website on their, have a page on their About site that actually lays out all of Twilio's values in a really cute way, and it really makes you understand what they as a company stand for and what they as a company do. You should have a similar thing for your club and society so that future people understand why you made this thing and why it's important to the student body. So next up is the first fall. This is when the majority of your experience leaves. This is where if you don't do what Matt did, you're going to be in a lot of trouble as all that experience flows away. And again, the problem here is knowledge transfer. So Matt has explicitly laid this groundwork for how we'd hand over the leadership. But there's other things you can do to solve this. Obviously, as a leader leaving, you need to make sure the next generation is prepared. But what about for attendees? Attendees and members of your event, you might have, say your event, say around year 2, your club is 50% second and third years. And then suddenly that 50% of third years leaves. What do the younger members do about mentorship? What do they do about learning skills that aren't taught in the degree? What do they do about web development? So the question you need to ask yourself in this stage is who has the experience and where do the next members get it? This is where things like what Kim did at Concordia are really interesting. So Concordia has a hackathon every year. they did a week-long program of events leading up to that hackathon where experienced members who had been to the hackathon before, who had won the hackathon before, who had been going for a number of years, held workshops for the newer members so that everyone was prepped in advance for the hackathon. Kim's proposal was all about finding the people who had the knowledge and the experience in the community and making sure that that knowledge was shared ahead of the upcoming event. Samantha Outland, another campus expert in Florida, took a really different approach. Sam's community is really interesting. Her school is only 3 years old. It's Florida Polytechnic. It was literally made 3 years ago. So like there's no school, let alone community. Like there is nothing there. There is no groundwork. So those students who've been there for those first 3 years are enormously important. They've seen the school grow up from like literally nothing to everything it is now. So Sam and her impact proposal was built all around making a portal where students could share their knowledge and people get access to it, and actually incentivizing students to do that. How do you make a student who knows something share it with everyone else when it's going to take time, they've got a degree, they've got hackathons to go to? And that was the entirety of Sam's proposal. And they made this portal and managed to get it online before their hackathon, and it was a great resource for other people at the time. I know Portacode as well had a fantastic page of community resources ahead of the hackathon, and that was sourced from the community, and that's another really great example of how you can facilitate this knowledge sharing. So the terrible teen stage. Again, this is all about diversifying experience. People in this stage, your community members in this stage are going to want to differentiate themselves. They're going to want to do something that gets them on the map, gets them noticed, makes them as successful as the founders. The most important thing is to keep them busy. You want to make sure they have very clear goals so that they don't change the logo. That is basically misplaced energy, right? It's like a really great thing. They're doing something that's effective, doing something that's important, they're doing something that is visible, but it's procrastination. What if that energy they took into doing that was used to run a workshop, or used to host a new event for a new audience, or used to do something interesting, right? So here I'm going to talk about Amy. Amy's proposal, Amy organizes Women in Tech conference, as I mentioned earlier. Amy's proposal was all about this community kind of getting to a point now where it was paired with HACCATHONS in University of Nottingham, and it was getting to a point now where it had been through a couple of handovers, a couple of new committees had taken over it. It was getting restless. The founders had long since left the university. There were other communities that were very similar objectives springing up around the city, and it's all about how do we bring these two things together? How do we say, cool, we've got these different communities coming up here, we've got this energy that's happening, how do we channel that energy into similar goals? So Amy's proposal was all about bringing in other people with similar aims. So there was a Women in Tech meetup in Nottingham. It's about bringing that conference together with that Women in Tech meetup. And then we also have Wilhelm. Wilhelm said this many times. I apologize, Wilhelm. This is coming like a conglomeration in your face. Wilhelm is a campus expert at UCL, which is again super interesting because that society is in itself over 10 years old. You had your 10th birthday last year? Last year. Like a club being 10 years old is just ludicrous. That's a really, really old club. And that introduces new problems. So Will's actually in this for two stages, for the institutionalization stage and this stage. And the reason he's in for this stage is because as you've got a club that old, again, like people, after that club's been running for 10 years and loads of great things have happened, new committees are going to think like, how do we make this livelier this year? How do we bring back the youthful energy that a newer club, like these other new clubs around the UK are having? And the way Wilhelm did that was to divert everyone's energy into a really great cause, which was creating a shared API for the school. Wilhelm and his committee worked with their school's IT department to create the UCL API, which was an API for students to access and build apps based around the data that the IT department has, and now he's organizing a hackathon about that. So part of Wilhelm's impact proposal was about how to support this growing community, basically providing a channel for new attendees to not only learn about things. For example, if you're trying to teach new attendees about a REST API, what better way than to teach them on data that they're having to work with every single day, right? Data about them, data in the university, that's really interesting. And B, it focuses their energy. In future years, committees and members can come on and say, cool, we've just joined a committee. What's our first action? Well, let's see how the UCL API is going and if we can add any new features. It adds a productive thing to do rather than changing the logo. So now back to Wilhelm again for the life crisis. And this is about, as I said, opening the doors. This is about saying we've got to accept that our club is kind of part of the institution. It's a de facto route through, and almost every good student is going to want it for their CV, right? So actually, we're going to talk about pandas first. I can't remember why we're talking about you, Panda. Why are we talking about you? I'm not sure either. Maybe I just like this GIF. Oh, sorry? Oh, I can send you. It's actually publicly available on the Spring 2017 Campus Expert repo. I'll remember why I spoke about you later, but for now, I'm going to move on to Wilhelm. So again, very similar to Matt. So this is the other end of the spectrum. Whereas Matt dealt with his leadership changes in year 1, Wilhelm also had an impact proposal that was dealing with leadership changes. Wilhelm was looking at his committee as a 10-year-old entity and saying, this has kind of had an exponential bureaucracy explosion. There are, as some of the committee were talking about, of other London societies, there are historical issues with other London universities. There are historical issues with events. There's legacy stuff here that's really holding new committees back that they don't have to deal with. How do we, A, decouple that from the duties they have to do, and B, actually carve a path to success for them? And Wilhelm was based his entire proposal based around, there were like some really enterprise level managerial conversations that me and Wilhelm had around his impact proposal that were incredibly useful for companies, let alone students' union. And once you get to this kind of like 20, 30 plus committee members in an organization that old with that many ties back to the school, you've really got to start taking cues from traditional organizations and thinking, this is still a student society, it's still about having fun, this is still about enabling people to do cool things, but at 30 people, we do need to have processes. We do need to have things documented. We do need to make sure that people know where the right forms live, that they get introduced to the faculty members, that there's proper handovers in time. And it's really important that if you're in one of those older societies, that you do have these things down, because otherwise future members are going to be left in a rickety position. So cycle begins new. There's a couple of interesting ones here. So again, this comes down to fragmentation and diversification. And I want to give an example of diversification. This is Alyssa. Alyssa, up until recently, was at the University of Edinburgh. Alyssa identified a really interesting problem with the communities at Edinburgh. Edinburgh has a really interesting kind of like range of communities. Under CompSoc, there's, actually, where is an Edinburgh person? There's like 10 or 15 kind of subclubs now.
Sort of special interest.
Cool. So under they've got this overarching society that then has special interest groups. And there's a huge range of things they address. They kind of have societies within societies, which is a really great model, by the way. And looking across all of those, this identified that there's loads of stuff for beginner programmers. There's hackathons, there's workshops, and loads of things for more expert programmers. There's like opportunities to get involved with open source projects and opportunities to get involved in local companies. But how do you move from, I've just found out about Node.js, to I'm comfortable enough to run a company on Node.js? There's a huge gap there that wasn't being addressed. So Alyssa went out to build an intermediate club, basically like, hey, you've done more than a tutorial, but you're not yet comfortable to sit down and write an app from scratch. What do you do for those people? So that was a very needs-driven thing. Alyssa didn't come into Campus Experts saying, I want to start this club. Alyssa came to Campus Experts and said, I have no idea what I need to fix. Looked at her community and decided there is a gap here that's not being addressed. I'm going to start a special interest group specifically around that, which was really, really interesting. And it started a new special interest group within CompSoc. End of the road. This is always going to be a tough one. The campus experts we have that come to a society end, there's been several calls that like near tears. It's always very emotional for everyone. But sometimes it just works out better. So again, this comes down to the question, why are members here? Is it time to just pack up and go home? So I'm going to give 2 examples. So this is Gwen. And this also kind of comes back to Amy with the Women in Tech Society. Gwen runs what is arguably an incredibly niche group in Florida. And that is a group in her university for graphics programmers. Not just graphics programmers, but specifically graphics programmers interested in ACM's academic conference around graphics programming. It's very, very niche. And when it was founded, there was a great need for that. The school had leading research in that field. Lots of people were interested because their professors were doing it. And it was a really successful club. Over the years, Gwen has been involved with it. And basically now no one wants to do this. No one cares. And at that point, Gwen had to say, is it time to close doors? What Gwen did instead was identify that some of the skills that the existing members still had, it was about 4 members, some of the skills that they had and the reason that community was first founded, because the professors were interested in it, may actually still be valuable for other students. But right now, the interest isn't there. So what Gwen did instead was basically give that community, work with an existing community that was doing well, and gave that community wholly over to that one and actually re-merged it with an existing one. The community, the club in itself no longer exists. They no longer run their own events, but the expertise found a new home. And those people didn't just pack up and like leave and stop doing events. They now do events within their niche, within a wider student body, which is now starting to gain interest in the things they're doing. And eventually at some point, I imagine this may have room to spin out again and become its own club. Elliot, on the other hand, just had rotten luck. Plymouth, deep southeast, west, deep southwest, no one is there. Students, it's not a particularly The students in that university have very particular needs right now. They are very conscious of their path into industry. They're paying a lot of money for a university which is struggling on the league tables. They don't necessarily want to hack for fun. They just want to get the best degree they can and get into industry as fast as they can. And they stopped being interested in clubs and societies. Elliot had to face a difficult choice with no one else to take over the club of just wrapping it up. And Elliot challenged that NG in a really positive direction. His whole impact proposal was initially about how do I hand over to a new committee? Instead of just saying, well, there are none, I give up, Elliot graduated and moved to Bristol. And over there, when you graduate, you shouldn't be a campus expert anymore. That is usually the rule. Elliot's still a campus expert because he's actually helping 2 clubs in 2 different universities in Bristol start up and do their own thing. He's taken that positive energy he had from Plymouth that just unfortunately was no longer needed in Plymouth, and he's rediverted it to another university, which is a really positive and really inspiring move, I think. So that was a look through the life cycle in all different stages and different ways that some people address them. I'd love to talk to you throughout the day about whether you fit any of those patterns, whether you've encountered these problems, whether any of these solutions I mentioned could be useful for you, and whether we could talk about how you can apply them. And basically, I want to help you break the cycle.